Sundays at Belle's house were never really about family. They were performances, costume changes in khakis and button-ups, forced smiles like porcelain masks, each of us falling into the same seating arrangement as though it were ordained. I used to joke in my head that it felt more like an audience with royalty than a meal. You didn't just come to eat. You came to behave. I adjusted Peaches' collar before we walked up the drive, the sun casting long shadows across Belle's perfectly trimmed hedges. She was humming softly, nothing cheerful, just filler for the silence we both knew would start the moment we stepped inside. "Smile and survive," I whispered, half to her, half to myself. It had become my silent mantra over the years. Inside, the house smelled like roast beef and polished wood. Belle was already seated at the head of the table. Mary Ann, ever the enforcer of grace through passive aggression, greeted us with a tight smile and a comment about how nice it was we could finally make it on time. Peaches hesitated at the edge of the dining room. There it was. The chair. High-backed oak with a floral cushion. My mother-in-law's chair. She'd passed 6 years ago, but no one ever sat there. Not because it was forbidden, but because it wasn't even a thought. Like no one dared disturb a ghost who hadn't asked to be left alone. Except Peaches didn't know that. She slid it out, unaware of the unspoken rule, just trying to be helpful as she always was. Her little hands gripped the arms of the chair as she eased herself into it. No one said a word at first. Belle glanced over. His eyes didn't flash, they narrowed, quietly, like a dog just before the growl. The room held its breath, but I didn't catch the signal fast enough. "Don't you dare sit there!" Belle's voice cracked through the room like glass hitting tile. Peaches jumped, nearly knocking over her water. I'm sorry, I didn't know," she stammered. "That chair isn't for kids. That chair was your grandmother's." And just like that, in one violent motion, he grabbed the soup bowl next to him and hurled it across the table. It landed directly on Peaches' lap. I heard the crack of ceramic on wood. I saw the steam rising from her jeans. But the thing I remember most vividly, the silence. No one screamed. Not even her, at first. Mary Ann gasped, hand to mouth, but stayed seated. My brother-in-law's wife looked away. Someone coughed. Someone else took a sip of wine. I dropped my fork, heart slamming into my ribs. "Peaches!" I rushed to her, the scent of broth invading my nose, thick, meaty, wrong. She was frozen, her hands splayed mid-air, like she couldn't move without permission. I yanked napkins from the stack near the breadbasket and began dabbing her soaked lap, my own hands trembling. Belle just sat there, not a flicker of regret, not a glance at the child now crying into her chicken and vegetables. "It's okay, baby. It's okay," I whispered, shielding her with my body. But it wasn't, and everyone knew it. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You threw soup on a child." "She sat in the wrong seat," Belle muttered, as if that justified everything. "She didn't know." He shrugged. "She should've." I looked around the table, eyes pleading, daring anyone to speak up. No one did. They all stared at their plates like the turkey needed slicing more urgently than truth needed air. Mary Ann, ever the diplomat of dysfunction, finally broke the silence. "She shouldn't have sat there, dear." The room shifted around me. My stomach churned, not from the smell, but from the betrayal. It wasn't just Belle's action, it was their acceptance. Peaches was crying now, quietly. I pulled her close and whispered, "It's not your fault. You did nothing wrong. Nothing." Belle stood and walked out of the room, just like that. No apology, no backward glance. I walked Peaches out to the car without saying another word. No one followed. The door clicked shut behind us. That night, after the chaos and the tears, I sat at the edge of her bed, watching her sleep. Her legs were bandaged from the heat, her cheeks stained with dried tears. She looked so small, smaller than I remembered. There's a kind of silence that hurts more than shouting. It coils into your gut and presses until it hardens. It becomes part of you. I sat there in the dim light of her nightlight and stared at my phone. I hovered over the contact list, thumb twitching above Tilly, my old friend, now a lawyer. Then I moved to Sarah, our school counselor. Then I hovered over Mom. but I didn't press call. Instead, I reached for a notebook from the shelf and flipped to a blank page. The soup incident, Sunday, 1:17 p.m., I wrote at the top. I started writing everything down. Peaches had fallen asleep almost instantly after I helped her out of her soup-soaked jeans, gently dabbed her legs with a warm towel, and wrapped her in her favorite fleece blanket. Her hair was still damp, clinging to her forehead, but she looked peaceful for the first time since Belle's explosion. I stood in the doorway of her room, watching her chest rise and fall. The soft hum of her breathing grounded me, but my hands were still trembling. I could still hear the clatter of the bowl. I could still see the way the broth had splashed against her thighs. But more than that, I couldn't forget how quiet it had been afterward, how they had all just resumed eating. Marianne had passed the breadbasket, looked at me as if I were overreacting, and said, "She should have known better." Like it was obvious, like Peaches, at 13, should have read the room better than the adults did. No one else had moved. No one had protested. Not even a glance toward Peaches. Their faces had stiffened into what I now realized wasn't shock, but agreement. On the drive home, Peaches didn't say much. Her eyes stared out the window as if counting streetlights might erase the moment. And I, gripping the steering wheel, kept my mouth shut because I knew that if I opened it, I'd scream. Not at her, but for her. That night, after Peaches had drifted into sleep, I sat at the edge of the bed, thinking about how the soup wasn't the real burn. The real damage came from what wasn't said. The phone rang around 8:15. I almost didn't answer it, but the screen flashed Nate, Belle's eldest, my brother-in-law. I picked up. "Hey." He didn't waste time. "Julia, listen, I heard about earlier." "Did you?" I said flatly. "I just want to say, I know Dad can be intense, but you know how he is. Always has been. He's old school." I didn't reply. "Look, this isn't something we need to drag out, okay?" he continued. "Let's not escalate it. It was soup." He got emotional. Nobody meant for it to get out of hand. "That wasn't emotional. That was abusive," I said, my voice measured, clipped. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then, Marianne's voice entered the call. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I'm sure you're shaken, but let's keep this within the family. We all want peace, don't we?" I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "Peace doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen." "But it was a misunderstanding," she insisted. "That chair is sacred. You know that. Your daughter." She didn't mean anything, but it stirred emotions. "So that justifies what he did?" I asked. "No one is justifying anything," Nate cut in, his tone firm now. "But you going around, making this a public issue, that's not the solution either." "I haven't told anyone," I said. "Yet." Another pause. "We just want to make sure you're thinking clearly," Marianne added. "We're a family. Families make mistakes. But we work through them, together." That word again. Family. Wielded like a weapon. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "We haven't asked you to." "I know you will. And I won't. If he wants forgiveness, he can say it to Peaches. Until then, don't call me again." I hung up. My hands didn't shake out of fear anymore. They trembled with rage. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened my notebook, and started writing. Thanksgiving last year. Belle shouted at Peaches in front of everyone because she corrected him on a trivia question. Called her a mouthy little thing. She cried all the way home. The summer before that, Belle squeezed her shoulder when she accidentally dropped her napkin on the floor. Hard. Left a mark I ignored. I flipped pages, added dates, specific words, looks, even the moments that felt small but were never really small. I remembered something Maya Angelou once said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Belle had shown us who he was long before the soup. We just kept excusing it. There was a knock on the door the next morning. Not loud, just 2 soft taps, followed by the rustle of paper. I opened the door to find a manila envelope on the welcome mat. Inside, a printed statement, an incident clarification agreement. It said the event was unfortunate and emotionally charged, and that both parties acknowledged no malicious intent. A place for my signature at the bottom. They called it damage control. I called it erasure. I didn't hesitate. That night, after Peaches was asleep, I lit a fire in the backyard fire pit. I placed the envelope inside, one page at a time, watching the edges curl and blacken, the flames eating each excuse. They thought I'd fold, that I'd cry, then comply, that I'd prioritize their comfort over my child's pain. They forgot something important. I wasn't just a daughter-in-law, I was a mother first. And when I act for my daughter, I don't ask for permission. Monday morning crept in like a whisper. I could feel it in the way the light filtered through the blinds, subdued, hesitant, almost as if it, too, was unsure what to make of the previous day. I stood in the kitchen in my robe, toasting bread, boiling water for oatmeal, trying to return to some semblance of routine. Peaches had always been a morning person, always the first to sit at the table, feet swinging under the chair as she hummed some tune from her phone. But that morning, she stood in the doorway. She looked at the table, at her chair, simple wooden, with the pink seat cushion she picked out herself. But she didn't move toward it. She just stood there, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "breakfast's ready." She shuffled forward but didn't reach for the chair. Instead, she sat on the floor, cross-legged, her back against the cabinet, the toast untouched on her plate. My heart cracked a little. "Honey," I said, crouching beside her, "you don't have to sit there. That chair is yours. This whole house is yours." Her voice was barely audible. What if he gets mad again? And there it was. Not just the wound, but the infection. The moment I realized this wasn't about the soup, it wasn't about a seat, it was about safety, or rather, the loss of it. I kissed the top of her head and didn't push. I let her eat in silence, but inside, I was unraveling. Later, while Peaches settled into the couch with her book, I found myself staring out the kitchen window, lost in a memory that returned with startling clarity. My first Thanksgiving as Belle's daughter-in-law. The table had been set immaculately. Name cards, cloth napkins folded into swans, more wine glasses than people. I had reached for the dish closest to me to help serve, mashed potatoes, I think, and Belle's hand stopped mine. "That goes counterclockwise, dear," he said with a forced smile, eyes sharp. "We're not animals." Everyone had laughed, so had I. But it had stuck with me. There was always something with him. One Christmas, I wore a red sweater with a reindeer on it. Belle said it looked juvenile and suggested I change before the rest of the guests arrived. That time, Mary Ann backed him up. "We aim for tradition here," she said, as though a cartoon deer might set the house aflame. And then there was the time I laughed too loud at a story Nate told. Belle stopped mid-chew to say, "Let's leave the cackling to the chickens." Again, everyone chuckled. I remember forcing a smile so tight it hurt my cheeks. "You're just here to support, not speak," he had told me once, during a kitchen cleanup when I asked about hosting Christmas myself one year. I had taken it, all of it, year after year. I had convinced myself it was harmless, that I was overreacting, that I needed to assimilate. But now my daughter was sitting on the floor to eat toast. "I thought I had imagined those slights," I whispered aloud. But no, I just swallowed them. Belle wasn't changing. He was consistent. Only the targets evolved. I went back into the kitchen, pulled out the notebook again, wrote down the Thanksgiving memory, the sweater, the laughter incident, the quote about not speaking. I drew lines between them all. Peaches joined me an hour later, quietly slipping into her chair this time. She didn't say anything, just picked at her cereal. Her posture slumped, not out of laziness but defense. She was trying to take up less space, and I knew then, with absolute certainty, that this wouldn't stop unless I stopped it. "This is how cycles continue," I murmured as I wrote those exact words in bold in my notebook. "Through acceptance." I couldn't take back the years I had endured in silence, but I could draw a line. Not for me, though I deserved it, but for Peaches. She didn't need to inherit my silence. She deserved louder protection. I scribbled another line. "What you don't heal, you hand down." I was done handing down shame disguised as politeness. That evening, while Peaches read in her room, I pulled out an old box of family photos. I hadn't looked at them in years. Most were formal, posed holiday shots, group photos at reunions. Belle, always in the center, arms wide like a patriarch in a painting, Mary Ann next to him, serene and smiling. And in the corners, the rest of us, wives, nieces, in-laws, always at the periphery. One photo caught my eye. It was from a 4th of July barbecue, maybe 10 years ago. My niece Clara was maybe 7 then. I remembered that day, not because of the fireworks or the food, but because of her tears. She had tried to help pass out lemonade, spilled some on Belle's shoes, and he'd yelled. She ran to her mother, sobbing. They had called her sensitive, told her to apologize. I had said nothing. Looking at the photo now, I saw it differently. The way Clara clung to her mother's leg, the way Belle stood rigid, arms crossed, face pulled tight, the way no one looked at her. Everyone looked away. I started going through the rest of the pictures. Thanksgiving, 2015. My hand reaching for a dish, Belle's gaze locked on mine. Christmas, 2017. Peaches in a red dress, sitting farthest from Belle. Easter, 2018. My brother-in-law's wife sitting on the edge of a bench, eyes down. Patterns, poses, power dynamics frozen in time. I took a pen and began circling faces. Then I marked the ones who looked away. That night, after I put away the photos, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ceiling. We had all played our parts in the silence. And now the echo of being dismissed lived in my child. Not anymore. The sun had barely climbed past the rooftops when I heard the familiar shuffle of the mail slot. I wasn't expecting anything. Bills usually came midweek, and I hadn't ordered anything. Still, something told me to check. There it was. An envelope with no return address, tucked half in, half out of the metal flap, like it didn't want to commit to being seen. Inside was a folded note, cream-colored paper, heavy and perfumed faintly like lilac. Mary Ann's handwriting was unmistakable, round, careful, almost too neat for someone capable of such mess beneath her words. Don't forget what your father-in-law did for you. You owe him more than this. That was it. One line. No greeting. No signature. But it might as well have been carved into stone. My hand gripped the counter beside me. The kitchen buzzed with the silence of morning, Peaches still asleep upstairs, the coffee maker humming behind me. My eyes scanned the note again, then again, as if somewhere between the lines there might be an apology, or at the very least, a softening. But there wasn't. Just a reminder, a tally, a leash. I remembered the funeral, how Belle had paid for the casket and the flowers, how he offered to cover the first month's rent when I was drowning in paperwork and grief. Back then, I thought it was kindness, a man looking after his late son's family. I never saw the receipt coming. Debt is not a lifetime leash. Help should not come with the right to harm. The note wasn't about gratitude. It was a threat, dressed in tradition. I placed it on the table, walked toward the stairs, and stopped when I heard small footsteps padding down the hallway. Peaches, still in her pajamas, her hair sticking out in all directions. She rubbed her eyes, looked up at me, then glanced at the paper in my hand. "What's that?" I hesitated. "Just something Grandma Mary Ann dropped off." She tilted her head. "Are we bad people if we speak up?" I crouched to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "No, sweetheart, we're not bad, we're just not quiet anymore." She nodded slowly, but I could tell the question had already burrowed itself deep. Later that morning, as I was making another cup of coffee, I heard a knock. Not loud, but persistent. I opened the door to find Mary Ann standing there with a tray, teacups, lemon cookies, her smile as pressed and ironed as her blouse. "Thought you could use a warm drink," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. I set the tray down and sat across from her. She poured the tea like she'd done it 1,000 times, her movements mechanical. "We're all a bit shaken," she began, "but I think with time, this can all be settled." I didn't answer. "You're dragging things too far, Julia," she said, still stirring her cup, though it was already silent. "You're upsetting the family." "The family should be upset," I replied. She sighed, placing her spoon down. "You know how Belle is. He's old-fashioned." That moment, it was emotional, not intentional. Intent doesn't cancel impact, I said, keeping my tone even. She leaned forward. Do you remember when you first came into this family? You were spirited, wild even. And Belle accepted you. I clenched my jaw. I remember him trying to silence me at every turn. Marianne shook her head gently. He gave you space. He let you in. No, he let me exist on his terms. She frowned. Look, I'm not here to fight, but you need to think about what you're doing. Peaches is growing up. If you alienate the family, she'll be isolated too. No holidays, no cousins, no support. This is support? I asked, gesturing toward the note still lying open on the table. Marianne's gaze didn't waver. We all make sacrifices for the ones we love. Sometimes that means choosing peace over pride. I stared at her for a long moment. Respecting someone doesn't mean allowing them to hurt you, I said finally. And you don't get to use past kindness to excuse present cruelty. You will not use the past to rewrite the present. You will not weaponize kindness. She blinked, taken aback. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Julia, I think we're done here. It was the first time I'd ever asked her to leave. She hesitated at the threshold, her mask cracking just slightly. Back inside, I poured the tea she left down the drain, one cup at a time, watching the warm liquid swirl away like the excuses she came with. Then I went to my notebook and circled Tuesday in red. That would be the day I drew the line. That night, after dinner, after dishes, after Peaches had gone to bed with a story and a forehead kiss, I logged into the family cloud. I don't know what I expected, maybe more holiday photos, maybe nothing. But there was a new album, titled Family Unity. Curiosity prickled my spine. I clicked, photos from the previous Sunday. A snapshot of the table, Belle at the head, Marianne smiling, Nate and his wife mid-laugh. The angle was perfect, too perfect. Peaches wasn't there. I clicked again. The image from the moment before the soup, gone. Another photo, this one where Belle was raising his glass in toast. Where Peaches had been sitting just moments before, the chair now cropped close, cutting out everything to the left. They had erased her, erased the event, erased the stain. I leaned back in my chair, stomach tight, not with rage, with clarity. There are people who'd rather rewrite the truth than admit what really happened. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter. I was fighting against a legacy of erasure. It started with a phone call from the school, the kind of call that makes your heart stutter before you even hear the voice on the other end. Mrs. Tofana, this is Ms. Kramer, the assistant principal at Lincoln Middle. I'm calling about Peaches. I dropped the dishcloth in my hand. What happened? She's okay. No injuries, nothing like that, Mrs. Kramer said quickly. But there was an incident in the cafeteria. By the time I got to the school, Peaches was sitting outside the office. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her face tucked behind them. She didn't even lift her head when I sat next to her. Miss Kramer opened the door, motioning us inside. A student made an inappropriate comment, something about Peaches and a chair, she said carefully, watching my reaction. What kind of comment? She was mocked. Someone said, "Don't sit in dead people's chairs." Peaches pushed the student. It wasn't a hard shove, but enough to be considered physical aggression. I turned to Peaches. Her voice barely broke a whisper. I didn't mean to, but they made it sound like I asked for it. I took her hand. You didn't do anything wrong. She'll be sent home today, just for the afternoon. No suspension, Mrs. Kramer added. But we wanted you to be aware. I nodded, thanked her, and led Peaches back to the car. We drove in silence, the kind that doesn't settle, only simmers. Back home, I made her hot cocoa. She didn't drink it, just stared at it, as if afraid it might be taken from her too. I went upstairs and sat at my desk, opening my laptop. I hadn't planned to do it that day, but something in her voice, they made it sound like I asked for it, unlocked a door. I had forgotten about the security camera in Belle's kitchen. We had installed it after he'd nearly burned the house down with a forgotten roast 3 Christmases ago. No one ever mentioned it afterward. It just became part of the background. I opened the app, logged into the archived footage, and scrolled back to Sunday. The timestamp read 1:17 p.m. I hit play. There it was. Peaches pulling out the chair. Belle's face tightening. His sudden movement. The arc of the soup. Her stunned silence. I replayed it twice. No one moved. No one even blinked. I downloaded the file. Then I watched it a third time. This time, I paused at every face around the table. The cousin who had later sent me a smiling emoji in the family chat. The sister-in-law who'd passed the butter right after the incident. Marianne, reaching for her wine glass. No one had even looked at her. I saved the video to the cloud, copied it to a USB drive, encrypted it. I took screenshots of each face, each reaction, or lack thereof. I noted the timestamp. I made folders. I organized silence, not rage, not tears, strategy. This time, I would speak, not in noise, but in proof. I opened a fresh document. Event timeline as the header. Thanksgiving 2022. Belle snapped at Peaches for asking if they had almond milk, called her too precious to function. Spring 2023. Belle criticized her shorts at a barbecue, said she was one size away from trouble. July 2023. Belle told her to hush and let the grown-ups talk at the family reunion. I copied screenshots of texts. Marianne saying, "Don't stir the pot," Nate reminding me, "It's just his way." Even the photo album titled Family Unity with Peaches cropped out. I was no longer just documenting moments. I was building a case. Peaches peeked her head into the room. "What are you doing?" she asked. I turned to her, smiled gently. "Just putting things in order." She walked over, looked at the screen. "Are you going to tell everyone?" I thought about that. I'm going to tell the truth. Not yell. Just say it, and let people decide what they want to do with it. She nodded slowly, then quietly left the room. Once she was gone, I renamed the folder. Peaches, Protected. I didn't feel afraid anymore, just focused. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing safety. That night, after dinner and the dishes, I returned to my desk. The house was quiet. Outside, the cicadas were humming, the sky fading into its summer dusk. I plugged in my headphones and opened the video again. I watched her flinch. I heard my own voice on the footage. "It's okay, baby." I paused. It wasn't okay. Not anymore. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. They didn't count on this. They never thought I'd look at that camera. They didn't think I'd save it, label it, archive it. They didn't think I'd replay it. I didn't post the video that night, but I knew I would. And when I did, they'd never look at me the same again. Thursday afternoon crept in heavy and slow, like the weight of something I couldn't name sitting just behind my ribcage. The house was quiet, too quiet. I found Peaches in the sunroom, the kind of light barely streaming in that made everything feel suspended in time. She was curled up on the rug with her colored pencils scattered around her, silently working on something. I didn't say anything at first, just watched. When she turned the paper toward me, I stopped breathing. The chair, the one from Belle's dining room, the one soaked in symbolism now, stained in silence and soup. She had drawn it engulfed in flames, the edges curling in thick black lines, the legs warping like they were made of wax. Around it, a room full of people, all faceless, their heads bowed, some with their arms crossed, others turned away completely. "It was on fire, Mommy," she said without looking up. "That chair makes people mean." I wanted it gone. I sat down next to her, but my words tangled in my throat. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow? She continued. "No one even helped, not even Aunt Caro, and she always helps." I took the paper gently, staring at it longer than I probably should have. It told me more than Peaches had since the incident, more than she ever needed to say out loud. When a child sets fire to a memory, it's because no one else is protecting her reality. I placed the drawing on the counter, my hands suddenly cold. Later that day, once Peaches had gone upstairs to nap, I pulled out my phone and scrolled down to a name I hadn't called in nearly 2 years, Tilly Devine. We'd met back when Peaches was in preschool. She was a lawyer in Louisville, specializing in child welfare and advocacy. We'd bonded over bad coffee and a shared hatred of school bureaucracy. Life had drifted us apart, but some people don't fade from memory. You keep them in your back pocket for moments like this. I hit call. She picked up on the second ring. Well, well, she said with her usual rasp. Did the PTA finally implode? I smiled weakly. I need to talk. About Belle. Tilly's tone shifted. I've got a spot at Keller's on Maple. Meet me in an hour? We met at a small cafe just off the highway. No music, just the hum of coffee machines and the occasional clink of ceramic. I brought the drawing, the USB, a printed timeline, and my notes. Tilly didn't interrupt. She sat across from me, listening, arms crossed, her brow tightening with every detail. When I was done, she looked at me for a long time. You know, she said finally, a lot of people walk into my office looking for permission. You don't need that. You need someone who knows what this looks like in a court file. Is it enough? I asked. What I have? She nodded slowly. The drawing. That's emotional evidence. The video? It's everything. The timeline? That's the story no one else wanted to tell until now. I exhaled, my fingers gripping the coffee cup. You're not crazy, she added, more softly this time. You're documenting generational harm. That's powerful. What happens if I take this forward? There will be fallout, she said plainly. But there's already damage. This puts the spotlight where it belongs. You won't just be seen as the angry daughter-in-law. You'll be seen as the mother who didn't stay quiet. That landed in a place deeper than my spine. We talked logistics, what to submit, what to prepare, who to expect pushback from. Tilly even offered to connect me with a local therapist who worked with kids navigating family trauma. I nodded, took the folder back with me, walked to the car with a steadier stride than I'd had in weeks. By the time I got home, Peaches was up, hair wild from sleep, cheeks flushed. Where'd you go? She asked, stretching like a cat. Just a quick coffee, I replied, with someone who's going to help us. She tilted her head. Are we telling everyone now? Not yet, I said. Just someone we trust. She blinked, thinking that over. So, it's just us and her? For now, we're starting with the truth. We sat on the couch for a while, curled under a blanket, flipping through channels we didn't really watch. Eventually, she asked for a sandwich. Not because it was lunchtime, not because it was routine. She asked because she was hungry. That's when I knew we had taken the first step. Sometimes the first real win is seeing your child feel safe enough to be hungry again. That night, after Peaches went to bed, I walked into my study. I turned on the lamp, sat at the desk, and opened the Peaches Protected folder. I clicked Save As and renamed it Proof of Pain 01. I placed the drawing next to the USB on the desk, the flames on paper burning brighter in my mind than any match ever could. You're not invisible anymore, I whispered. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Marianne. Dinner. Saturday. Family only. Don't bring drama. I stared at the screen, then smiled. This time, I wasn't coming to dinner with a smile. I was coming with evidence. I arrived at Belle's house at 6:02 p.m. sharp, wearing the plainest blouse I owned. Cream-colored long sleeves, high neckline, no patterns, no accessories, just enough to say I made an effort. No more, no less. The USB drive was tucked in the inside pocket of my coat, secured in a small case. I checked for it twice before I stepped out of the car. I wasn't nervous. I was calculated. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an unveiling. The driveway already held 4 cars. I recognized Nate's silver truck, Caro's crossover, and Belle's black Buick, always parked in the same spot like it had a reserved plaque in concrete. The house was lit from every window, glowing warm against the night that had just begun to settle. Marianne greeted me at the door. She didn't waste time. I'm so glad you came, she said, wrapping her arms around me as if the past 2 weeks hadn't existed. Let's not ruin tonight, okay? I smiled, soft and restrained. That depends on how you define ruin. She blinked, then laughed awkwardly. We're just trying to keep things normal. Normal. The table was already set when I entered. A centerpiece of fall leaves and fake candles ran along the center like they were staging a magazine shoot. Peaches wasn't with me. I'd asked a neighbor, Melissa, the retired art teacher, to stay with her. I told Peaches it was just a dinner and that she didn't have to come. She didn't even ask why. Everyone was in their places. Belle sat at the head, Marianne next to him, Nate across. I chose the seat beside Belle. He looked at me once, then not again. Dinner began with forced chatter, discussions about the weather, the rising cost of groceries, someone's vacation plans to Charleston. It was all too polished, like they were reading from a script. Halfway through the meal, Belle stood. "We've been through a rough patch," he began, clearing his throat as if trying to cue reverence. "But healing takes intention, so we wanted to share something." He unfolded a piece of paper from his pocket and began to read. It says, "I'm sorry I caused trouble. I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. I understand now that family traditions are important. I promise I'll be more careful, and I hope everyone can forgive me. Peaches." The room was quiet for a beat, then soft clapping started. Nate nodded. Caro smiled tightly. Marianne turned to me. "She's a sweet girl. She just needs guidance." I looked at her, then back at Belle. "Who wrote that?" Belle blinked. "It's from Peaches." "No," I said. "It's not her handwriting, and I didn't give anyone permission to speak on her behalf." Marianne leaned in. "We thought it would help smooth things over." I kept my voice level. "You forged an apology from my child." "It's symbolic," Belle muttered. "The words don't matter. The sentiment does." "No," I said again. "The words matter more than anything." My heart didn't pound. My voice didn't crack. I had trained for this moment through every second of silence they forced on me for years. They didn't expect me to question the script, I thought. They forgot I learned how to read between the lines. I reached into my coat and pulled out the USB drive. No more symbols. Here's what actually happened. I stood, walked over to the television, and plugged it in. I selected the video file without comment and hit play. The footage began. The table, the conversation, Peaches pulling out the chair, Belle's sharp voice, the soup flying, Peaches flinching, and the silence, all of it, frozen in time, undeniable. No one moved during the replay, just like they hadn't moved then. Marianne finally said, "This wasn't how it happened." I walked over to the dining table and placed a printed transcript down beside her plate. "This is the day you all chose silence. And today, I chose to bring it back into the room, for my daughter." No one clapped this time. The silence afterward was different. Not heavy like guilt, hollow like exposure. The kind that wraps around people when the truth enters and there's no space left for pretense. Belle stood abruptly, his chair scraping back against the hardwood with a shriek. He walked out without a word. A cousin across the table, a young one, probably still in college, looked at me and whispered, "I didn't know it was that bad." I nodded. Most people don't. Until they do. Another reached for their water glass, knocking it slightly. No one reached to help. The table was still. Marianne opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. I picked up my coat, calmly, the same way I had walked in. "Dinner's over," I said. And with that, I walked out. I hadn't said everything I needed to. But I'd said enough to split the table in half. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand. The light from the screen blinked like an alarm in the dark. At first, I thought it was just the usual Sunday spam or school district notifications, but when I picked it up, I saw the number of missed calls, 12, and texts, over 100. The family group chat had exploded overnight. Some of the messages were short. "You didn't have to do that." Others were longer, defensive. "You crossed the line, Julia. That wasn't necessary." And a few surprised me. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't. I always felt it too. You were just the first brave enough to show it." Belle hadn't replied. Marianne had sent only one text. "You've embarrassed us." I stared at her words longer than I should have. Embarrassment. That was what they feared. Not harm, not abuse, not a child being publicly humiliated and burned by her grandfather. No, They were worried about appearances. Peaches walked into the room, rubbing her eyes. She looked at me, then the phone still glowing in my hand. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. I set the phone down and pulled her close. "No, honey. Not anymore." I sat on the edge of the couch with my laptop open, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The words didn't come in a rush. They arrived slowly, like a storm you can see coming in the distance. Steady, inevitable, clearing the air as it moves in. I wasn't writing to yell. I was writing to document. I began. Last week, my daughter was scalded with soup at a family dinner. By her grandfather. No one spoke up. Not then. Not after. Not when they printed a fake apology and claimed she'd written it. And certainly not when I asked why silence always came easier than truth. I included everything, what I'd seen, what I'd felt, the moments that built up to it. I didn't paint myself as perfect. I told the truth about my silence in earlier years. About the things I let slide. The comments. The control. I attached the video. I uploaded a scan of Peach's drawing. I wrote about how she set that chair on fire, in crayon, because no one else would do it in reality. And I ended the post with this. This isn't revenge. This is protection. This is legacy repair. I hit publish. Within 2 hours, my inbox filled with shares, reactions, messages. Local mom groups reposted it. So did therapists, teachers, a child advocacy organization I'd never heard of. People weren't just reading, they were responding. A woman from Tennessee messaged me. "I left my husband after he poured boiling water near our daughter's feet. You gave me courage." Another from Utah. "I thought I was the only one whose family protected the abuser more than the child." The school counselor emailed me a single line. "Your daughter is lucky. And your voice is helping more than you know." Later, I saw a comment that quoted Viola Davis. "You can't be hesitant about who you are." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for how loud I'd become. Around noon, as I was updating the folder on my desktop with new screenshots and testimonials, I got a private message from a name I hadn't seen in years, Paul Bennett. He was a friend of my late husband. He'd moved out of state, remarried, but occasionally popped up on birthdays and anniversaries with a short message. The message read, "You need to see this." Attached was a scanned clipping from an old Lexington Herald article, dated 1994. It showed Bell, standing outside a school board meeting, arms crossed, a stern expression on his face. The headline, "Principal opposes new corporal punishment rules." Paul added, "He fought to keep paddling legal at the elementary school. It was a big deal back then." People just stopped talking about it. I felt something cold run down my spine, not fear, but realization. He wasn't just reacting in a moment of frustration. He was following a pattern he'd spent his whole life justifying. They said it was one mistake, but it wasn't. It was a legacy. I added the article to my folder. That evening, Peaches and I went for a walk. The air was thick with summer heat, but there was a breeze that made it feel less suffocating. She held my hand tightly, then stopped abruptly near the park bench where we usually sat. "People are talking about us, Mommy," she said. I crouched next to her, brushing her hair from her cheek. "They're finally listening to us." She looked up, her expression more curious than afraid. "Why didn't they before?" I paused, because sometimes people would rather protect a lie than confront the truth. But once the truth is out, it doesn't go away. That night, just before bed, my phone buzzed again. A new message, this time from a parenting podcast I followed casually but never engaged with. "Hi Julia, we read your post. Would you be willing to speak about your experience on our show? We think more people need to hear your story." I stared at the message, thumb hovering over reply. Peaches walked in with her pajamas halfway on, holding her toothbrush like a microphone. "Guess what I just made up?" she asked, giggling. "A song about burning soup." I laughed, an actual full belly laugh. "Sing it after brushing." As she skipped off, I looked back at the message. They erased us from one table, but I built us a whole new room. By Monday morning, the storm I had triggered had grown legs and teeth. The family group chat, once reserved for brunch invitations and birthday wishes, had become a battlefield. Dozens of unread messages blinked at me. I didn't open them all. Just the first few were enough. You didn't have to humiliate him like that. Whatever happened to keeping things in the family? Hope you're proud. You tore us apart. But then came the quiet ones, the ones not meant for public threads. I always wondered when someone would say it. Thank you. I never had the courage. I believe you. We all knew. It was the silence behind the curtain cracking. I started getting screenshots forwarded from friends. Belle's reputation, once cemented in stone across local church committees and school alumni boards, was beginning to flake. Someone on the neighborhood app had started a thread titled "The Gunnis Family Incident." Anonymous posts followed. He used to make my son cry in gym class. He ran detention like a prison yard. No surprise here. Marianne stayed quiet, but one message finally arrived. You've embarrassed us. This will follow Peaches forever. Think about that. Peaches was at the kitchen table, drawing with soft pencils. She glanced up from her paper. Is everyone mad? I sat down beside her, brushing her hair behind her ear. Some people don't like when silence ends, but that doesn't mean we did anything wrong. She nodded but didn't say more. I wasn't rattled. I wasn't shaking. I was steady. By Tuesday morning, she handed me a folded sheet of paper. It's for school, she said. We had to write about someone in our family. I unfolded it, not expecting much more than a few sentences about our cat or maybe her late father. But what I read took the breath from my lungs. I used to call him Grandpa, she wrote. Now I call him my mom's dad-in-law, because grandpas are supposed to feel safe. A single line had been crossed out. He's not my safe person. Another part made me pause. I used to think chairs were just for sitting. Now I know some chairs come with rules I don't understand. I closed my eyes, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't the pain that caught me. It was the clarity. The way a child could cut through years of history with one sharpened sentence. She didn't need me to explain anything. She understood, and she said it in a way I never could at her age. I called Tilly. She answered on the first ring. I saw the post. It's spreading. I need to read you something, I said. When I finished, Tilly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, This girl has a voice, and she got it from you. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not yet. By Wednesday, the ripples had turned to ruptures. Invitations for family birthdays were retracted, group photos deleted from social media, cousins choosing sides in whispers and DMs, and then came the call. Marianne. I let it go to voicemail, but then she called again, and again. On the third ring, I picked up. Julia, she said. The coolness in her voice could have frozen glass. This has gone far beyond your daughter. It's bigger than you now. You've ruined everything your husband worked for. I let the silence stretch before answering. Then maybe everything he worked for was built on silence. She exhaled sharply. You don't get to redefine our family. I didn't, I said. You did, when you asked us to forget. The line went dead. That evening, Peaches helped me wash dishes. We didn't talk much, just passed plates and wiped the counter together. A simple rhythm. Mom, she said suddenly, do families break? I paused, dish in hand. Sometimes, I said. But sometimes, that's the only way to rebuild one that doesn't hurt. She nodded, turning the faucet off. Legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we refuse to pass on. I walked into my study later that night to update my folder, now thicker with community emails, new testimonials, anonymous stories, and support from women I'd never met. I added Peaches' letter. She told me I could. I wasn't sure what to call the file, so I titled it, Proof That Healing Speaks. Just before bed, I saw her scribbling in her journal. Can I read it? I asked gently. She shrugged. It's a poem. Not done yet. She passed it to me anyway. A chair is just a chair, unless it hurts. A room is just a room, unless it hides. A family is just a word, unless it listens. I looked at her. She was smiling, small, but certain. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A journalist, Someone from a local parenting magazine had found my post. She wrote, "Your story is sparking conversations across state lines. Would you speak at a town hall? We think people need to hear from you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned back to Peaches, hugged her, and whispered, "You built this with me." She looked up. "Built what?" I smiled. "I thought I flipped a table." I looked down at her poem again. "Turns out," I said, "I cracked a foundation." By Thursday morning, the house was still. I'd slept better than I expected, though it hadn't been the restful kind. More like the kind of sleep that happens when your body is too tired to keep holding tension. My phone buzzed while I was pouring cereal for Peaches, and I instinctively braced myself. But this time, it wasn't a family member. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Tafana? This is Detective Raymond with the Lexington Police Department. I wanted to speak with you briefly regarding the video and online post related to an incident involving your daughter." I held the phone tightly and moved to the hallway, keeping my voice low. "Yes, I'm available. We've received multiple calls from members of the community, and the footage has raised concerns. I'd like to schedule a formal statement and advise you that Child Protective Services will be following up as well." The words landed without surprise. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Of course. I've documented everything." By mid-afternoon, CPS had reached out. A calm, even-voiced caseworker named Janelle scheduled a home visit. She was thorough, kind without being condescending, and immediately asked if Peaches had access to counseling. When I mentioned that I was already in contact with Tilly and had options ready, she seemed relieved. The school counselor also reached out. They wanted to adjust Peaches' workload, offer private check-ins, and ensure she felt supported. Everything was moving, not in a whirlwind, but in a series of purposeful steps. I sat in the school meeting, legs crossed, hands folded, voice steady. Years of silencing had trained me for this moment. I didn't tremble. I spoke clearly, and I listened, really listened, to how seriously they were taking it. When the system finally listens, I thought, it's not closure, but it's a shift. Justice doesn't always arrive with flashing lights. Sometimes it comes on lined paper, in calm voices, through conversations over office desks and living room tables, but it begins with someone choosing to believe you. That evening, after I finished dinner and Peaches had gone to her room, there was another knock at the door. Not heavy, not hurried. I opened it to find Letitia. It took me a second to place her. Belle and Mary Ann's former housekeeper. She had worked for them for nearly 8 years, but she'd left quietly a few months before everything erupted. I'd always remembered her as kind and quiet, the kind of woman who never said more than necessary, but always looked you in the eye. She stood on my porch with her purse clutched to her chest and a look that said this visit wasn't just social. "I saw the video," she said, "and I've been thinking about coming here for days." I stepped aside to let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She didn't touch the coffee I offered, just held her hands tight in her lap. "I was in the kitchen that day," she began. "When it happened." I nodded. "I saw the whole thing. I saw Belle raise the bowl. I heard your daughter cry. And I watched the others. Not move. Not one of them." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I've seen things over the years. That wasn't the first time Belle disciplined a child in anger. One time, he threw a remote at Ethan for talking during a game, hit him right in the chest. The kid cried, but they laughed it off, called it rough love. Another time, he slammed a glass down so hard near Nora that it shattered across her plate. She never came to another dinner." Letitia looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry." "You're saying something now," I replied. "That matters." She reached into her purse and handed me a handwritten statement. 2 pages. Dated. Detailed. "I don't want anything," she said. "I just want to help make sure this stops." Your daughter didn't deserve that. None of them did. We sat in silence after that. Not awkward, not tense, just full. 2 women who had once served in silence, now putting words to years of damage. Sometimes the witnesses you need are the ones who've also been erased. The next morning, Peaches woke up humming. It wasn't a big deal on the surface, but I noticed it. She brushed her teeth to the rhythm of some old camp song. Then she asked if we could make pancakes on Saturday and if I could read her a chapter from her new book before school. No nightmares the night before. No sudden crying in her sleep. Small victories, but mighty. We started sitting out on the patio for breakfast. We kept a shared journal, each of us writing back and forth in it like pen pals living in the same house. Sometimes silly, sometimes heavy, but honest. Healing doesn't come with a ribbon, but it shows up in music, in trust, in morning sunlight. I updated my folder one last time. Letitia's statement filed, CPS emails saved. I labeled everything clearly, not for defense anymore, but for record, for truth. It didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like history being placed where it belonged. That evening, I settled into the couch with a novel and a mug of peppermint tea. The house was calm. Peaches had gone to bed early after coloring pages of puppies and planets. The knock at the door startled me, not because it was loud, but because it came with intention. I opened it slowly. A man in a suit stood there, holding an envelope. "Julia Tofana?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me the envelope. "You've been named in a formal investigation. Mr. Gunnis is being reviewed. I was asked to deliver this in person." I took the envelope, closed the door, and stood there for a long moment. So many years of them telling me there'd be no consequences. Turns out, consequences never miss a house. By Saturday morning, the official investigation had begun. Detective Raymond returned to our home, this time with forms, a recorder, and questions I had prepared for long before they were asked. I handed him the documentation I had been compiling since the beginning. The video, Peaches' letter, Letitia's statement, screenshots of texts, the timeline of past incidents, even the artwork. He flipped through everything in silence, nodding occasionally, scribbling quick notes in shorthand only he could interpret. His tone was respectful, professional, but there was something else beneath it. Recognition. The kind that says, this is no longer a family squabble. This is something else. Peaches wasn't home during the visit. I'd asked Melissa, our neighbor, to take her to the botanical garden for a few hours. I didn't want her anywhere near another adult with a badge asking questions. By the time the detective left, the air felt clearer in the house, but heavier everywhere else. Within hours, the silence started shifting outside our walls. Neighbors weren't waving as often. Marianne's porch, once dressed up every Sunday morning, was now dim. Belle hadn't been seen in days, and though no official press had run the story, the video had already done its work. A local parenting group had reshared the TikTok clip I had posted weeks ago, just the black screen, Peaches' voice layered over mine saying, "It's not okay, not anymore." That clip had now crossed state lines. "Helped me leave my family too," one comment read. Another, "My mother made me apologize for being screamed at. I thought that was normal. It wasn't." I scrolled in silence, letting each sentence settle deep. What began as our moment had cracked open a wound far bigger than us. That evening, Peaches came to me with her journal. "They said at school that my mom is the one from the internet. Did that bother you?" She shrugged. "No. One girl said I was brave." I kissed her forehead. "You are." Sunday morning, I overheard a conversation between two neighbors in the grocery store. "She's unstable," they say, "always emotional. Ruining Belle's golden years. It's sad." I didn't confront them. I didn't have to. Their words didn't stick. They slid off, like rain off a roof I no longer stood beneath. One cousin sent me a text. "I know what he did, but we don't expose family like this." I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it without replying. If silence is the cost of family, I thought, maybe I was never part of it to begin with. That afternoon, Peaches got uninvited from her cousin's birthday. The invite didn't come. No call, no explanation. I didn't tell her. I just bought a small cake from the bakery, balloons with dogs on them, her favorite, and invited Melissa and her grandson over for a just because party. Peaches never asked about the other party. We ate cake in the backyard, played cornhole, and danced to Taylor Swift until the sun dipped low and fireflies blinked against the hedges. That night, she handed me our shared journal. She had written, Some families you're born into, others you build. Monday was a new kind of quiet, not heavy, not tense, still peaceful. We decided to clean the house, not out of obligation, but out of instinct, the kind that tells you when it's time to release the past. We started in the hallway closet. Boxes of old photo albums, tablecloths from holidays that never felt warm, a set of embroidered aprons Marianne had given me years ago. I held up one and paused. "You keeping that?" Peaches asked, standing barefoot on the wood floor. "No," I said. "It smells like soup." We laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. We donated 3 boxes that afternoon. Then we picked a wall in the living room and painted it soft green. Peaches called it New Mint. It wasn't about covering anything, it was about starting something. I deleted the family group chat, removed myself from photo tags, archived the family folder on my computer. No post, no announcement, just peace. You don't always need revenge, I thought. Sometimes, peace is your protest. That evening, after we finished dinner and Peaches had gone upstairs to read, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The wind was picking up outside, but in here, the house felt anchored. I thought of all the times I had wanted them to understand me, to hear me, to welcome me like someone who belonged. And now, I didn't want their table anymore. Just as I began closing the blinds, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Marianne. I didn't press play right away, just watched the seconds tick across the screen. Finally, I hit play. Her voice cracked. Not theatrical, not rehearsed. "He's sick. I don't know what to do. Please, call me." I sat there for a long time after it ended. The door we closed, someone was knocking from the other side. The call came on a Monday morning while I was watering the herbs on the back patio. The air smelled like rosemary and fresh soil. I didn't recognize the number, but something about the pause before the voice told me this was a call I'd been waiting for, even if I hadn't known it. "Mrs. Tofana," said the voice, calm, official, but not cold. "This is Assistant D.A. McKinney from Fayette County. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Gunnis has officially been cited. There will be a review for civil liability and possible further community safety measures." I sat down on the wooden bench and stared at the tomato vines just starting to bloom. "Thank you," I said, not as a reflex, but with every ounce of intention. "We also received strong community support for your position. We're coordinating with CPS and local nonprofits to address patterns like this going forward." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just breathed. I wasn't the woman who needed outside approval anymore, but hearing those words, it was a full circle moment I never thought I'd live to see. That same day, I received an email from a local mothers collective. They were organizing an awareness event, an evening of community storytelling and advocacy, and they wanted me to speak. I read the invitation twice. There had been a time when the idea of standing in front of a crowd made my chest tighten, but that version of me no longer held the mic. This wasn't about stage lights or applause. This was about truth. They used to say I was too much, I thought. But maybe being too much is what breaks cycles. I agreed to speak. The venue was a renovated church auditorium downtown. Nothing flashy, rows of chairs, a soft spotlight, a mic on a wooden stand. The kind of place where people come to listen because they want to, not because they were told to. When I stepped up to the mic, my hands were steady. My voice didn't tremble. My name is Julia Tofana," I began, "and I'm here to talk about silence, about what it costs, about what it hides." I told our story, not with flair, but with clarity. The soup, the chair, the gaslighting, the silence. I spoke of Peaches, of the night she said, "What if he gets mad again?" Of the moment she stopped sitting at tables altogether. I quoted Fred Rogers, "Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable." I paused. Belle's actions weren't just about one bad moment. They were seeds planted across generations, normalized through compliance, silence, and family performance. I was expected to swallow them, smile through them, and hand them down to my daughter like a legacy. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Another man leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on mine. I held up a framed photo of Peaches' drawing, the burning chair, the faceless room. This is what happens when we pretend tradition matters more than safety, I said. This is what silence does to a child. The room was still. You could feel the hush, not of tension, but of resonance. Afterward, people lined up quietly. One woman hugged me. "I'm 62, she whispered, and this is the first time I've heard someone say what I've been feeling my whole life. Another woman pressed a note into my hand. "Thank you for showing what healing looks like." On the way home, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt whole, and that was enough. The next morning, I got a call from Marianne. Again. This time, she didn't sound defensive or angry. She sounded broken. "He's in the hospital," she said, voice shaking. "Stress-related. His blood pressure, heart, everything just spiraled. I don't know what to do. Please, just come see him. Maybe you can talk to him." I let the silence hang. Then I answered softly. "No." Her breath caught. "Let him rest. I already made peace. He doesn't owe me anything, but I don't owe him either." She tried again, but I gently cut her off. "Take care of yourself, Marianne. And take care of him. But don't call again. We've turned that page." I ended the call before she could cry, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Later that day, Peaches came home with a bright green poster board and glitter pens. "We're doing a school project on safe places," she said. "I picked the garden." I smiled and helped her glue dried rosemary to the border. That night, I told her, we forgave without forgetting. And that's how we moved on. We hung a new photo in the hallway, me on stage at the event, Peaches standing beside me, both of us smiling like we'd never been told to be smaller. No shadows behind our eyes. No ghosts under our feet. On Sunday, we walked to the park. Spring was turning to summer. The air was thick with honeysuckle and sunlight. Peaches held my hand. "Is this the end?" she asked, voice light but curious. I stopped walking. "No," I said. "This is the beginning, where no one speaks for us but us." She nodded like she understood, because maybe, just maybe, she did. I looked up at the sky, then down at her skipping ahead of me. If legacy is a story, I'm writing mine in permanent ink.